IVM.
Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of Mind the Gender Gap, a podcast in which we look at data, evidence, and stories to explore essential questions about women and work in India. Mind the Gender Gap is a collaboration between iWage and India Spend, and I'm your host, Sunaina Kumar. I am going to be steering the conversation today with two wonderful guests. Before I introduce them, let me tell you a bit about what we are discussing. We are looking at the role of self-help groups in improving the resilience of women and communities. Self-help groups are voluntary groups of around 10 to 20 women who meet on a regular basis. They pool savings and they are linked to banks that provide them loans for livelihoods. These groups harness the power of collective action for change. India has the largest network of women self-help groups in the world. Over 80 million women in India are in self-help groups, and these groups are a part of one of the largest community mobilization programs in the country and even the world, the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. Research has shown that the mission has been impactful in many ways economically, but even more so socially. It has increased women's participation in the workforce. It has mobilized household savings and provided rural women with access to banks and credit. Women in SHGs are able to negotiate for greater access to education and healthcare, a lot of studies show. It has also led to higher levels of empowerment and enhanced their decision-making in the household. During the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, SHGs demonstrated both impact and resilience. Women in SHGs provided support to the community for COVID relief measures, and those women in SHGs could also access savings to support their households. Over 8 in 10 women said that they could reach out to their self-help groups in times of need to access emergency loans, to get savings, and also to access information, found an iWage survey in Odisha in 2020. Through this episode, we will be hearing firsthand the stories of women in SHGs from different parts of the country talking about the work that they do. Like Sunita Shinde, who works as a digital Didi in rural Maharashtra, helping women access technology. And also Shamima Begum, who works as a Subidha Sakhi in Odisha, helping her community access social security schemes. Let me now bring in our guests. We have with us Sanchita Mitra. She is National Coordinator at the Self-Employed Women's Association, Seva Bharat, the National Federation of Self-Employed Women in India, spread over 18 states. Sanchita has worked on transforming SHGs into financial cooperatives in 2 states, and she oversees the development of new Seva institutions. Sanchita is joining us from Delhi. Welcome, Sanchita, and thank you for joining us.
I must thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Uma Mahadevan Dasgupta is Additional Chief Secretary, Panchayati Raj, Government of Karnataka. She works on guiding Gram Panchayats in a variety of operations and supporting women's groups. She has worked on the convergence of Panchayati Raj institutions with self-help groups for inclusive development in rural areas. Uma is joining us from Oxford, where she's currently based for a fellowship. Thank you for joining us, Uma, for taking our time for Mind the Gender Gap.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Sanchita, let's start with you. Can you tell us about your work with SHGs and what makes them the most effective institutions for rural women?
For me, the self-help group is the first unit where women come together. There's a solidarity movement which starts. So they come together and there is a financial discipline that is built. I mean, you must agree that most of the women do want to save, and this brings a platform for women to save, and they do not want to keep the money at home. They also want to, women say that we want to keep our money in such a place where it is safe and we can borrow at times of need. So the SHG model is a place where you can save and borrow. It's a very simple model where the women do understand. Sometimes bookkeeping becomes a little challenge, but they take help for that process. The other activity or the other process that sets in is a democratic process, because there are 10 to 20 members So the essence is that all the women should have access to this, the loans, etc. But the democratic process also comes through some kind of a monitoring, because if not monitored or if not vigilant, if all the members, then it tends to be within the hold of 2, 3 people. Here, very important is to have those women leadership or role models. This is something we also try to bring up, because they will also lead the way to more SDGs. Then these SDGs, now all these women have some work, economic activity. This is also unit where small economic activities, for the first time, the women may take up. Or women could be in economic activities, but they can do some alternate, they can do some value addition, they can bigger markets, kind of a thing. The other one is their loan taking appetite increases, because you have a first level loan, second level loan, third level loan. So loan taking also comes through a little bit of confidence, because there's a risk, there's a plan, you have to return it, you have to plan your business. So that also brings her to another level of maturity. The other part which we have seen through our experience, especially in Uttarakhand, where because of the hilly areas, you don't need 10 women to form an SDG, you can have a smaller number. What we started was the producer group of spices. So initially what these women, they used to do these SDGs, but sell this to the middleman. But when 4 or 5 SDGs came together, they started questioning, is the middleman giving us the right rate? Why isn't the middleman giving us till he sells? So those kind of negotiations started taking place. The middlemen were quite surprised, because many of the SDGs started in not a legal term, but they started actually federating, in the sense they used to talk to each other. So I feel the SDG can bring up higher levels of maturity, higher levels of solidarity, higher levels of risk-taking, and higher levels of business, because then only economies of scales reach.
Thanks for outlining that. Some very important terms that you introduced: financial discipline, solidarity, and democracy. All of these are reached through SDGs for many women in India. Uma, I want to ask you about the impact of COVID, which also demonstrated really just how powerful SDGs can be. Women in SDGs were among the first responders during that time. They were making masks, they were raising awareness, helping community health workers, supporting vaccination campaigns, and also reaching vulnerable households in really remote rural areas. But studies have also found that the economic impact of the pandemic on households, the loss of income, rising debts have affected the functioning of SDGs. How do you think SDGs can be strengthened, and are there lessons to be learned from the pandemic?
Thank you. That's actually 3 questions in one. First of all, the pandemic. I think it's very, very clear that the pandemic, the 2 years and more of the pandemic, have a tremendous amount to teach us. And we're still drawing out the lessons, looking at the data, but also looking at the experiences, the lived experiences of people. The first and most important and striking thing for me was how acutely the pandemic affected women. Women, not only in self-help groups, but women within their households, affected their livelihoods, increased their domestic responsibilities and care work, increase their levels of stress and anxiety in all sorts of ways. And of course, the data already shows the increase in child marriages and domestic abuse and so on. I've also always believed that economic empowerment is a doorway. It's not an end in itself, but it's a doorway to social empowerment and political empowerment too for women. And therefore, I think, as you pointed out in your question, self-help groups and collectivization, women having a group to be with, was a great source of resilience and solidarity for women during this difficult time. And therefore, one important lesson immediately is that these groups, these informal social networks, informal and formal social networks of resilience need to be strengthened, both for the economic opportunities they offer in terms of self-employment and livelihoods for women, but also for the sources of resilience and support at difficult times, at times of anxiety. And therefore, the things that immediately need to be done, especially for rural women, wage employment. In spite of the social networks, we also need to look at enrolling more and more women in self-help groups as job card holders, active job card holders in MG and REGA, involving them, increasing women's participation in MGNREGA, involving them not only in the traditional water conservation structures and the desilting, trenching, bunding works, earthworks, but also with individual benefits, which are available to women-headed households, women farmers, women with disabilities, and so on, bringing them opportunities to increase their farm income through horticulture, vermicompost, cattle sheds, animal husbandry, and so on. At the same time, providing women increased access to sources of livelihood for the NRLM self-help groups, such as the production, supply of eggs, supply of milk locally, supply of fresh vegetables, catering. It's important to make these connections because I think these connections offer both opportunities and sources of resilience at a time when the pandemic is so deeply linked to issues of undernutrition and to issues of protein energy malnutrition and so on, income communities. These are not only opportunities, but also actual strategies by which women's groups can help their members, not only economically, but also to improve their nutrition, improve their resilience levels.
Okay, so you actually brought in so many important ideas here. The one that I do want to go back to a little later on is what you briefly talked about the need to link self-help groups and NRLM with other schemes like Manrega. That is something that we would want to explore. But for now, Sanchita, I want to ask you the question of livelihoods, which of course Seva has been at the forefront of. And it has been a pioneer in mobilizing women into collectives, whether that's self-help groups, but also larger cooperatives for the purpose of livelihood generation. My question is that many SHG businesses are in low productivity sectors. They're confined to being microfinance units rather than vibrant business entities. How do you think this can be addressed?
First of all, I don't think it can address all because there are many women who have to come to that level of SDGs. But when they have that financial discipline, when they have that understanding of business, even in a small scale, then we can think of federating them into their own collectives. Seva's model is to form cooperatives or producer companies where the women buy their shares. So it is ensured that they become the owners of this share. In all the places that I have worked in, I started with the self-help groups. And in Bihar, for example, when we started with the self-help groups, there were women who wanted to save more. But because in the self-help groups, you can save as much as the others do. Mm-hmm. So it was becoming difficult. Or women who needed more loan because they had graduated to higher level of economic activity. Since we had a model of cooperatives or the bank, these women were taken to an exposure visit. And then they aspired that we should also have something else. So we opened a thrift and credit cooperative.
Uma, I want to ask you, stay with the idea of livelihoods, but in recent times, we've also seen SHGs evolve from traditional livelihoods to adopting emerging areas of work like digital and financial inclusion, sanitation, solid waste management, access to social schemes. And this is something that you have been a proponent of. Some of this has been enabled by the use of technology. A report by IVATE shows that digitization can deliver extensive benefits and make the functioning of SHGs much more effective. So what could be the role of technology in SHGs and how can the potential for emerging areas of work be tapped?
Thank you. I'll talk about the emerging areas of work first. This is something that I think, again, it's all about looking at windows of opportunity where we can support women to acquire the skills, get in there and start using that opportunity. Solid waste management in rural areas is one sector where we in Karnataka have tried to engage women's self-help groups in a very, very large scale way. In fact, we have a budget announcement in the Chief Minister's budget speech saying that all 6,000 Gram Panchayats in Karnataka, Gram Panchayats being the rural local bodies, will get their solid waste management end-to-end of management of solid waste will be done by the Gram Panchayat signing MOUs with the Gram Panchayat level federation of the women's SHGs, which means end-to-end solid waste management in 6,000 Gram Panchayats, that's 60% of the population of Karnataka, end-to-end meaning also driving the auto tippers. So we took up a very massive program of training women, inviting women SHG members for training, 30 days training, residential training, in driving the auto tippers. And I'm happy to say that around 3,500 women have already signed up. 1,500 or so women have been trained and acquired driving licenses. And as of now, as of last month, when I left Karnataka, 503 women SAG members were driving the auto tippers themselves in the Gram Panchayat. Driving is not the only thing. It's a livelihood, but it's also about visible empowerment and little girls looking at a woman driving the auto tipper and saying that, I don't need to be restricted to only certain types of livelihoods. There are more opportunities which open up for me. Also happy to say that nearly 4,000 Gram Panchayats have already executed MOUs, signed MOUs with the Gram Panchayat level federations. We've been training. This is not going to happen overnight. It requires a lot of hand-holding, a lot of, working out of, because running solid waste management as a business enterprise requires not only the actual hard work of segregating the waste, the secondary segregation, the collection, and so on. It also requires managing it like a business and therefore business skills. We have had a series of discussions with women-led organizations, nonprofits like Hasrudala and Sahas, which work specifically with women's groups and Paurakarmikas on solid waste management to come and do the training. A few days back, there was a full-day workshop in Chamarajnagar. We're doing district-to-district workshops with women, with women's self-help groups, to encourage them to come forward, to understand the business of solid waste management, to do it not as employees of the Gram Panchayat, but to do it as partners and to run it as a micro-enterprise. So this is one important thing. Sanitation, you spoke about sanitation. So with Jal Jeevan Mission, we in Karnataka are now planning to train at least 6,000, hopefully 12,000 women as plumbers to carry out basic level plumbing and maintenance of the pipes and the water supply systems in the panchayats so that they'll be available for day-to-day maintenance of this work. Now, this is an emerging area. Plumbers, giving them uniforms, giving them training, giving them certification, and so on. These are areas where I think women need to get into because we need to question this whole assumption that certain areas of work are not open to women. This is one part of it. The second part of it is about technology. Technology can be a great enabler, but it can also, as we know, be a barrier. And so to make technology work as an enabler, we need to train our women SAG members to be able to access financial services, to understand, to read their bank statements, to operate their banking through their own digital pay sakhis. So we are increasingly working with banks to take SAG members as banking business correspondents. During COVID, we had many banking correspondents, digital pay sakhis, going to the Gram Panchayats and sitting there on fixed days, even during the times of containment and containment measures, so that people could freely access their financial services. So these are areas. But technology, again, not only for banking. Technology offers more potential. For example, for online marketing, for catering to customer requests. Technology also offers opportunity through our decentralized libraries. We have digital libraries. It offers opportunities to see what others are doing, to understand other models and to learn from them. And so I think making technology work as an enabler is also an important part of our work. And we will continue to be doing this for our women self-help groups.
And since we're talking of emerging areas of work in self-help groups, we're going to go into a short segue where we will first hear the story of Sunita Shinde, who is from Maswar in Maharashtra. She's a member of a self-help group, and she's been working as a digital Didi with Mandeshi Foundation, an NGO that works on the financial inclusion of women. Digital Didis travel from village to village, and they train rural women in digital literacy and to use technology in their everyday lives.
अब 3 साल हो गए हमने बचत गट शुरू किया था. हम 12 महिलाएं हैं बचत गट में. तो बचत गट का फायदा ये हुआ मुझे कि मैं अकेली कुछ नहीं कर सकती थी ना. मतलब हमारी बचत महीना 200 रुपए है, तो मेरे अकेले की 200 रुपए में मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकती थी. लेकिन हमारे 12 लोगों के 200 रुपए तो मुझे 2,500 होते हैं ना. तो मेरा कुछ मतलब हर महिला का कुछ भी करने का हो तो वो बचत गट में से कर्जा लेकर कर सकती है. अकेले की 200 रुपए में कुछ नहीं होता, तो 12 जनों को मिलकर बहुत कुछ कर सकते हैं हम. मतलब अब मैंने आटा चक्की ली, उससे कर्जा लेकर पहली बार हमें हमारे घर के लोग भी कह रहे थे कि इससे क्या फायदा होगा, वो 12 महिलाएं या तुम्हें कुछ बोलेगी, ये ऐसा क्यों नहीं करना चाहिए वगैरह। लेकिन जब हमारी जरूरतें पूरी होने लगी, हमारा काम आगे बढ़ने लगा, तो घर वालों को भी अच्छा लगने लगा। और जो महिलाएं गट में नहीं है वो अभी हमें बोल रहे हैं कि आप दूसरा गट खोलो, हमें भी ये चालू करना है।
And before we return to our conversation with Uma and Sanchita, we have another fascinating story from Bhubaneswar. Shamima Begum is a member of a self-help group who works as a Subidha Sakhi with the Urban Management Center, an NGO that works on governance. She helps women and men in the community access social security schemes with the use of technology. Here is Shamima Begum in her own words.
तो हम लोग सीखे हैं, जैसा एक साल में एक समूह बैठते हैं, हम लोग की जो परेशानी है एक दूसरे को जान पाते हैं, कि घरेलू परेशानी हो, अपनी जाति परेशानी हो, कुछ उनसे जानकर सॉल्व भी कर पा रहे हैं और कुछ रोजी भी हमको रोजगार भी मिल पा रहा है। सुविधा शक्ति का मीनिंग है, तो हम लोग क्या सुविधा से लोगों के पास अपना योजना पहुंचा रहे हैं। शक्ति माने हम फ्रेंड बन रहे हैं, लोगों के साथ मिलजुल कर रहे हैं, बहुत आसान से लोगों के पास अपना योजना पहुंचा रहे हैं गवर्नमेंट की। हम लोग की ट्रेनिंग भी दे रहे हैं, सुविधा शक्ति हो कि ऐसे हम जो एसएचजी के मेंबर है उन लोगों को भी कुछ दे रहे हैं गवर्नमेंट ट्रेनिंग, कि अपने गाँव को कैसे इम्प्रूव करें, अपने शहर को किस तरह का मैंने इम्प्रूव कराना है हम लोग।
Both these stories show us the potential of technology in transforming the lives and livelihoods of women in rural India. Let's get back to our conversation with Uma and Sanchita. Sanchita, I want to ask you about gender mainstreaming in the program, which has been an objective of the National Rural Livelihoods Mission since 2016. And all policies and programs have a gender lens, whether that's financial inclusion of women to promoting asset ownership, food security, nutrition. In your view, how can the mission programming be strengthened with a gender lens?
First of all, I would like to start with we have very limited information on gender segregated data. We also have a business correspondent company through Seva in Uttarakhand. And when we ask our people, please let us know how many women have opened their accounts and how many men have opened. On the basis of the name they try to understand. And in Punjab, the basis of chord and sing, they try to understand. But I think it's a very simple process. At least that doesn't come to us. If it doesn't come to us, it doesn't come to the researchers or the practitioners, I think the policies also would not be very relevant. So this is one thing I really strongly recommend, that we need to have data in a more gender segregated way. The other part, if we need to mainstream them, I keep telling that the women's businesses still remain very small. When we need to increase, there is a lot of encouragement or some policies should be there. Like, for example, if there is a policy for women's self-help groups to have a community level assets, many of the women need tractor but cannot afford it. So if there is a community level asset, whether a tractor or a cold storage or a vehicle to transport, so I think there should be more policies on community assets for women's groups. That should be something that they can be encouraged with. There is a government's e-marketplace, which is GEM. And we have an MOU with them, and we are trying to onboard our members. Definitely, what the problem that we face is the scale, because the government orders also need kind of a scale. So we are struggling with that. But since GEM is also very encouraging, they have a 3% reservation for women. The scale, then you have to register in the portal. Anyway, those handholdings are required. Then you have to have a GST registration, etc., etc. So these are processes, because these are policies. Actually, there is a thought that it has to be a gender kind of, it's a women must be encouraged. But I think there are a lot of other barriers where the women are also not being able to take up existing policies. One, I would really insist, and I think the government is spending a lot of money on digitalization, but one phone per SG would be really encouraging. And I also met their secretary, and they say that the SG data are probably getting digitalized. But if there's a SG leader who is in charge of a mobile phone, I think the process would be more encouraging, and it will be in their hand. Otherwise, they again have to depend on somebody to do that.
A lot of potential, as you said. Uma, through your work with Gram Panchayats in Karnataka, you have been pushing for greater convergence or linking of NRLM with other government schemes, whether that's the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme or others. How can there be greater collaboration between institutions at the Panchayat level and NRLM, and why do you think that is important?
So, for me, it's not only about linking to schemes. It's linking fundamentally the Gram Panchayat with the women's federations. I think GP-SAG convergence is of very fundamental importance because, and in fact, this is reflected even in our Panchayat Raj Act. In Karnataka's Gram Swaraj and Panchayat Raj Act, we actually have a section 60B, which provides for the Panchayat to be able to give any contract to a group of women, like an SAG or a group of people, up to around 20 lakhs worth of contract, provided they put in, the group puts in about 10% of the cost. Why is this provision there and why is this convergence important? For two reasons. One is that women are among the most discriminated group within the panchayat. For example, women suffer, we know that they suffer discrimination and they suffer different kinds of deprivation. And therefore, it is primarily the panchayat's duty to redress this. So this is a step towards redress. But also, I think it's mutually beneficial because when the panchayat starts giving contracts, both for supplies of goods as well as for services, or for production, for manufacturing and so on. Recently, for example, the Har Ghar Tiranga program, all panchayats in Karnataka gave orders to the local Gram Panchayat level federation and obtained the flags through the SAGs. Now, this was mutually beneficial because the women's self-help groups were earning a livelihood and catering to an order for the panchayat. They were working as a business. It's also important that they are, Sanchita was just talking about local production and local consumption. Orders for services and goods within the panchayat need not go out if there are groups of women within the panchayat who are able to cater to it. But also it reduces the distance, the social distance between the panchayat and the GP level federation. I'm thinking of a woman who's the president of a federation in Kolar, who told me that for 18 years after she got married, she had never stepped into the panchayat. But when she became president of the Gram Panchayat level federation and signed the MOU for solid waste management, this was the first time. And in 3 months, she's so confident about going to the panchayat, pointing out the problems, discussing with them, talking to them about how they can resolve things. This, I think, is a way to solve one of the basic challenges of local government, which is participation. We have the Gram Sabha, which is a participatory assembly, which is quite a radical and revolutionary feature of local governance. But participation in the Gram Sabha can be ensured only if women feel that it's relevant, if they will be heard, if they will be listened to. Participation and collectivization are two ways by which Gram Panchayat and SAG convergence can help in improving the quality of local decision making. The very fact that women attend the Gram Sabha or come to the Panchayat and assert their rights is a step towards better accountability and better local governance. And therefore, it's of fundamental importance.
We've so far looked, of course, at self-help groups in the rural context. To wind up, Uma, I want to ask you the question of SHGs in the urban context. And we do know that there is a growing role for them to play in the challenges that we will be facing in urban contexts of health, climate, sustainability. How do you think they can help in income generation as well as the development challenges that we will be facing?
Thank you for asking that question because I've started to think that for some of the development challenges that we're facing, it's not only opportunities for SHGs, but that SHGs necessarily have to step up to meet those challenges because there is no other way to answer some of them. Decentralized solid waste management, again, continues to be perhaps one of the most important urban challenges that we face. This is an important thing. Urban SHGs, we've done work even during COVID, since I was coordinating with civil society organizations and NGOs on the COVID response, one of the things we did was to look at sanitization and hygiene being an area where women SDGs could be trained, could be skilled, and could take up opportunities. So we worked with LabourNet on training a number of women's self-help groups to become sanitization and hygiene entrepreneurs. For example, before a certain exam, if classrooms need to be sanitized, and if you need to call in a group to do it, or even in our own building, when the first cases of COVID were identified and when we needed to shut down the building and get sanitization done, we actually called in the sanitization and hygiene SAGs. And that was very, very useful, very, very good opportunities. Urban SAGs have a lot to contribute in areas where, with the kind of problems that we have of urban poverty, of domestic work being part-time, being precarious, not having protections, not only domestic work, but also many areas of housekeeping, security, retail, and so on, are areas which are so precarious and so uncertain that collectivizing women can be an answer not only to supplying reliable services, which is required for urban processes to continue smoothly, but also to protect the women members and to give them a degree of protection through the collective, which they otherwise perhaps would not have, being in precarious and uncertain and unprotected work. So many opportunities, much to do, but certainly India's self-help groups have shown that they can rise up to all of the challenges.
And that's actually a wonderful note for us to start wrapping this up. We're out of time. I have gleaned so much from this conversation, so much insight from both of you. Before we wrap this up, a very quick question. We've created these unique and impactful institutions in India, and we know that there is huge potential in them. I'm going to ask you both for quick thoughts for the roadmap ahead. Uma, let's begin with you.
Yes, I think SAGs, women's self-help groups, have shown that they are a way to resilience, to solidarity, to protections for women, even as simple as informal social networks for women in difficult circumstances. We need to build on these. We need to find them ways. And as Sanchita was saying, hand-holding into these areas is very, very important. But once the hand-holding is done, I have no doubt that the women will take up the new skills, build on them, and take us into a completely new level of women's empowerment, which is going to be so good to see.
Sanchita?
I think whatever is in existence, like we have livelihood, we have health, we have education, we have skilling, if there could be more convergence.
I'm really glad we were able to underline this at the last part of the program. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Uma, and thank you, Sanchita.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode. If you are interested to know more about self-help groups, then iWage has a treasure trove of reports, which we will share in the show notes. Please do look that up. And if you like this episode, spread the word and recommend it to friends. The show is available on IVM Podcast Network and on all major podcast streaming platforms. We will be back soon with the next episode where we are going to be discussing women and the future of work. You don't want to miss that. See you next time.
Hello, everybody. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Shunya 1, Sheila Aditya is joined by Sonakshi Nathani, co-founder and CEO of e-commerce platform Bikai. Sonakshi shares how Bikai helps small businesses create their online shops on WhatsApp by building their e-commerce channel. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus Kajol and Abbas talk about McDonald's bringing back nostalgic Happy Meal toys and a Bengaluru tea shop that accepts payment in crypto. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk look at issues around moonlighting and analyze what the future of work might look like. On the season finale episode of Don Baika Gappa Aika, Avanti and Aparna discuss the life and issues of child actors who are exposed to the glitz and glamour of showbiz at a young age. And on A Niche Thing, Anish Bhasin talks to fellow IVM host Ashlyn Doctor. They both share their experiences of intermittent fasting for years, from fasting for 18 hours to 5 days. Guys, go to our website, ivmpodcast.com. You can check out the merch store, also links to all of our social media stuff, which is at IVM Podcast. Also, do check out our YouTube channels. We have a number of channels with many of your favorite shows available as full video podcasts. Finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Volvo XC40 Recharge, Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Sneakers, there's so much more than just footwear. A cup of well-brewed coffee, that can taste like wine. Our phones can even tell the time, but a mechanical watch, that on your wrist, feels different. These subcultures, some very niche and some not so niche, are fantastic hobbies, and I'm obsessed with a lot of them. They're approachable, they're a lot of fun, and they're very, very therapeutic. My name is Anish, I'm the co-founder at Swami, a homegrown beverage brand, and I have many such niche interests, which I will explore with you on this podcast, aptly named Anish Think. Anish Think, every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast Network and all other major podcast platforms.